Welcome, everybody. StephenGray here, and you are either watching StephenGray Vision YouTube channel or you are listening to this on Anchor, that's ANCHOR.FM, or one of the places it sends its audio podcasts, such as Spotify and iTunes and a couple of others. And we are continuing with this series of interviews, which are the purpose of which is to help educate, help share information and inspiration on what I would argue is the central or most important subject on this planet right now, which is the absolute necessity of a widespread and deep consciousness transformation so that we can put planet Earth, or we can do whatever our modest abilities allow us to do, to help straighten out the trajectory of human affairs for the generations to come. And in particular, because that's the field that I plow, as it were, we are focusing in this series on the relationship of psychedelic or entheogenic sacred plant medicines and substances to that work, as many of us understand them to be the most powerful medicines or healing and awakening medicines when they are used properly in the right context and so on. And for that purpose, I'm delighted to be interviewing a woman who's doing some fantastic work. Her name is Laurel Sugden. She's a PhD candidate and Usoma Institute scholar at the University of British Columbia. That's right here, where I am in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Her interdisciplinary work is centered on the San Pedro cactus, also known as Huachuma, and the Andean cultures who have been in relationship with this plant for millennia. This year, in partnership with Josip Orlovac del Rio, Laurel co-founded Huachuma Collective, an organization which cares for the biological and cultural sustainability of San Pedro through community-led initiatives. I also want to say that I've known Laurel for a couple of years now. She, as I mentioned there, has been studying in Vancouver, and under the tutelage of her advisor, I guess is what you call it, Wade Davis here, the legendary Wade Davis. And Laurel has also spoken at our Spirit Plant Medicine Conference with I guess what, Laurel, you wouldn't mind my calling a kind of a primer on Huachuma, since most people don't actually know much about it up here. And that's a question we're going to talk about as we go, of course. So welcome to our little podcast here.
Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah. Where are you, by the way?
I'm east of Lima, Peru right now, headed up the Carretera Central into prime wild San Pedro territory.
Exciting. So let's go back a little, because I want to ask you about your work in a moment. But speaking of that work and the PhD that you're doing, what got you interested in that in the first place? And when did that, how long ago did that happen?
Yeah, well, I think it was the same thing that I think got a lot of us started on this path of the visionary plants, which is personal crisis. So in 2016, I was going through a breakup, and I'd just finished my undergrad, and it was a very big time of transition. And so it was sort of just this, throw your hands up and go to Peru for a few months and try to figure things out sort of deal. So I wasn't looking at all for hallucinogenic brews when I came down here the first time. But very quickly started hearing about and learning about ayahuasca, and crossing paths with many people who worked with ayahuasca. After a few months of traveling and hearing these stories, I was like, wow, maybe I need to drink this plant. And I tried my darndest. I really did. I tried, really tried to make it work with ayahuasca, and it didn't. And so it was this very clear moment of feeling a lot of walls in that direction and saying, okay, it's not the time to drink ayahuasca. And it was about 2 weeks before I was going to leave Peru, and I'd gone on this big backpacking trip around one of the major mountains, Alzangate, south of Cusco, and had just been like snowed on and hailed on and exhausted. And I came back and they said, let's go to San Pedro. And I said, what's San Pedro? And so it was a very sort of this wonderfully synchronistic moment of meeting San Pedro in the Lares area of Peru, and it was love at first sip.
Interesting. Just out of curiosity, before we get too far into this, we're using, and you have so far also used in the bio there, for example, the term San Pedro cactus and Huachuma somewhat interchangeably. But I believe you've told me that there's a negative connotations also to that word Huachuma. Can you explain a little why? Do you generally prefer to use the word San Pedro, and what is it about the word Huachuma again?
Oh, I don't see any negative connotation at all to Huachuma.
Oh, okay.
Is the Quechua word for the cactus in the native Indian language. Quechua in this area, and Aymara to the south in Bolivia, it's Achuma. But colloquially in Peru, most people use the term San Pedro today. So most of the people that you actually hear using the term Huachuma are gringos, which, it's wonderful that we have that term, and I love the term. It's a beautiful, beautiful word. But colloquially in Peru, you hear San Pedro more often.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I guess I heard it. Maybe it was from Robin and Darcy that I think they suggested that that word had sometimes been used by non-natives as a kind of a slur or something against looking down on the native people somehow. But anyway.
And the word Huachuma means uma is head, and watch is sort of like dizzy, borracho, drunk. So it's sort of if we look at modern day Quechua, it means something like a clouded head, or a dizzy head, or even some people translate it as you lose your head, which is sort of an interesting parallel there too with decapitation.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, tell us a little bit about what you are doing with your PhD and the research that you're doing down there. And you mentioned a program that you've also co-founded called Huachuma Collective. So would you please describe some of the things that you are doing, what your focus is?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's a big question. So right now, my PhD fieldwork, I'm in year 3 of my PhD, and so we're really getting going on the ethnobotanical fieldwork. So this in the next few months here, I had the opportunity to travel throughout the north of Peru. Going to different archaeological sites, taking botanical collections of the plant. When we talk about San Pedro, we're talking about many different species of cactus. So San Pedro is sort of this umbrella term for, several species, Echinopsis peruvianus, Echinopsis pachinoi, Echinopsis macrogonus, Scrophulacola, Santaensis. So, and then within those, there are also all of these sort of hybrids that form, they believe, and there's so much variation.
I was having a little trouble hearing you there. So anyway, you had just been saying, let me get back on track with you there. I got a little distracted. You had just been saying that there are many different words, pardon me, some what did you call them? Like species within that are all that all contain the same alkaloids, or are used for the same purposes essentially.
Used for the same purposes, yes, in many ways, but the truth is that some of these plants are so different. The difference between a wild plant from Matucana, further up the valley from where I am right now, which is actually, I have one right here, just these big spiny dragons of plants. And the difference between that and a cultivated plant with no spines that's more of perhaps an Echinopsis pachanoi, you would think that they are two different plants, Stephen. You almost wouldn't call them the same plant. The physical effects, the mental effects, the spirit of the plant is so diverse
Really?
across its native range in Peru and Ecuador, and perhaps down into Argentina and Bolivia as well. So, San Pedro is the umbrella term. They're all psychedelic cactuses, which contain mescaline, hordenine, and a whole lot of other phenethylamines and other, if we're just talking about alkaloids, there's a huge diversity, and there's very little research actually that's happened about the entourage effect.
Oh, that's really interesting.
How they're working.
Sorry,
We're not talking about alkaloids so much as we're talking about spirits, and plants and beings that live everywhere from very high, intense, rainy river valleys surrounded by lush foliage and flowers and ancient stone walls, all the way down to the coast that, there's not a single plant growing. They're cultivated. They grow at the edge of the ocean in people's gardens and homes, and have for millennia, at least, hundreds and hundreds of years. And the difference between that plant that grows in this arid, sort of windswept, sandy environment right up against the Pacific, this massive, biggest body of water on Earth, that just this, with the freezing Humboldt current sweeping up the coast. That's a different plant than these plants, between the coast and the mountains. When we talk about the plant spirit, it's incredibly diverse. So I'm just barely beginning to know, the plants, the wild plants here, the plants that are cultivated in Arequipa, the wild plants from Chavin, from Huaraz, from Ancash. So it's when we say, oh, I've drunk San Pedro, I tried San Pedro, yes, yeah, great. And was that, which San Pedro was that? Which spirit did you work with? Was it, from somebody's garden, cared for with love, cooked with love and drunk, or was it, ripped out of the wild by one of these legal companies that's hacking the plant to pieces and powdering it and drying it and shipping it to the United States and calling it San Pedro? And it's a big question. What medicine are you drinking?
Well, I think that's an interesting question for all these plants, and perhaps actually all plants that we take as medicine, or even food for that matter, is, what is the source? What is the connection? I mentioned to you in our conversation from a week or so ago, I think, this book by Tyson Yunkaporta called Sand Talk. He's an Aboriginal academic and a bunch of other things from Australia, and he was talking about they only eat certain kinds of plants, for food in certain times of the year and certain kinds of conditions, because they have different energies and different things like that. But anyway, don't want to go too far in that direction. I never did get to hear the rest of what I think you were trying to tell us about your work. What are you actually doing? It sounds like you're just, in one level, from a layperson's, receiving point of view out here in the audience, so to speak, just trying to learn as much as you can about everything to do with Huachuma. But you have a focus as well. You're heading toward a dissertation, and can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm in the interdisciplinary studies graduate program at UBC. Which means I get to look at this from all angles. I get to look at it from anthropology, from psychology, from botany. I get to do field work that's ethnographic and also botanical. So Really the focus of my research over the last 3 years is being very, becoming very evident in this research that I'm coming into in the next few months, which is, getting to know these different plants that grow, in 52, there are 52 river valleys on the coast of Peru, and, wild San Pedro grows in probably 2/3 of those. And so getting to know these plants, on the one hand, the botanical angle of botanical collections we have a wonderful collaboration happening with a phytochemist in New York who's going to analyze the phytochemistry of the in vivo, the phytochemistry of these living plants, and also of the shamanic brews that are cooked with these plants, because the plant undergoes a transformation while it's cooked. So that's the botanical half. So it's sort of creating this geographic botanical map of what do these plants look like? What's their phytochemistry like? What's, what are their genetics like? And how, the taxonomy, we don't even know what to call these species. Different people are, publishing different papers, and nobody is agreeing about what really is San Pedro. So, this research that we're doing over the next few months hopefully will clarify a lot of that, just by creating this large botanical pool of many different San Pedro species, all collected, by the same person in the same season, that will hopefully tell us a little bit more about what this plant is from a botanical and chemical perspective. Concurrent with that, is the ethnographic work. So it's, meeting people in the field. It's talking to, shamanic practitioners and people who work with the plant ancestrally in North Peru, which is sort of the epicenter of the culture around San Pedro in Peru. So it's a very, very interdisciplinary look at the plant, which hopefully will, all come together in story. It's in story and in going through this mythology, as it relates to San Pedro and the contemporary relationship with the plant and the ancient relationship with the plant. We're mostly, in line with my mentor, Wade Davis's work. We're really interested in telling the story of San Pedro. What is San Pedro's true name?
Wonderful. So here's a bit of a left field question, not too seriously out in left field, but have you thought about, excuse me, you know your particular kinds of strengths. Some people are teachers, some people are, writers, different things like that. Some people are organizers or, scientific researchers and so on. Do you have any sense of where you might ideally see yourself after you've completed your PhD work and any immediately following postdoc work, for example? Where you see your sort of talents best used? Do you have any sense of that?
Oh, I'm a writer, 100%. Yeah, no, I'm not, definitely not moving towards the academic track, because I believe that this field and these, the world is moving, in many ways too fast for systems to keep up with right now. Certainly too fast for academia to keep up with. And truly, the real work is on the ground with the plants, with, people who are working with the plants, and not sort of trying to keep up in the knowledge-based way. It has to be keeping up in a way that's intuition-based, that's story-based, that's interactive and engaged. And, I feel that that's, language can do that, but academia cannot.
Very interesting point of view. Yeah, well, that's great. I'm assuming that probably the great majority of people who are going to watch this or listen to it don't know much at all about Huachuma or San Pedro. It's becoming better known, of course, up in North America, and more people have tried it. But compared to say ayahuasca, my guess is for every 1,000 people that have had experiences with ayahuasca, there might be 10 people that have worked with San Pedro up in this area. So I'd like you to, if you don't mind, make this a bit of a primer or educational segment as well, by talking a little bit about the history, for example, like how it's been used, and what's going on with that, and then let's get into a little bit more about the actual plant. And it's very interesting to me that you talk about different spirits and that, but you also mentioned before we got on here something about it being incredibly unique. That was your words, within the psychedelic plant community, so to speak. So, but that's kind of two questions maybe. So would you talk a little bit about the historical record, so to speak, or what we know about the history of Huachuma or San Pedro?
Sure. So, if we talk about the history of the plant itself, it's much older than human history. And it's not written down. So we don't know what the plant was doing for those millions of years before we showed up. But people showed up in the Andes about 15,000 years ago, which is incredible, 12 to 15,000 years ago. And we see San Pedro show up in the archeological record about 4,000 years ago with a lot of regularity. So it's absolutely incredible to look at these early representations of San Pedro and what was happening in the culture at that time, because you had these sort of very nomadic societies with very little, they were creating very little art. They were fairly small populations moving. They were, pastoral, and there was, appears to have been a lot of conflict. And then something happened about 4,000 years ago where all of this art and culture just started flowering, just started showing up. And, irrigation, this incredible, network of water canals and irrigation started to show up. People settled down into societies and started building these incredible civilizations. And, agriculture started happening, as it did independently in several parts of the world. But concurrently with that, we see San Pedro showing up. And so the most remarkable culture of that time was called Chavin. And it's just this astonishing culture that made so much art and, just these incredible advances, and we see very little evidence of war happening in this culture. So it was sort of this impulse, this Chavin impulse that swept 2,000 kilometers south to north of the Andes, and united it into a single network of religious pilgrimage. So this culture was based entirely on religion, and appears to have been based entirely on religion around San Pedro. So it's just, if we look at that culture's art, we start to see a lot of what San Pedro shows us. It's very visionary. It's very body-based. It's very sensual, sensory. You have all of these mythical figures of humans transforming into jaguars, into eagles, into dragons and serpents. And so it's just this like transmogrifying, like incredible collection of culture. Sorry, somebody's knocking on my door.
It sounds like there's a lot of action around there. I can't tell. I just want to let folks know, in case they're hearing. If they're hearing what I'm hearing, they're hearing a lot of other sounds here besides Laurel's voice, and I just want to let people know that she's in rural Peru, and they've had floods and landslides recently, which have messed about with, signals and internet and all that kind of stuff. So please bear with us. I can't tell whether some of this has just been, digital stuff, or it sounded like there were dogs barking at one point. Were those digital dogs or real dogs?
They're real dogs.
And go, okay, yeah. So yeah, that's fascinating to me. This whole bit that I've gotten from you, and I've seen it in a couple of other places too on the Chavin culture. It kind of it's almost create for me personally. Who cares about me that way? But it kind of almost creates in me a longing, to live in a culture that seems to be, balanced, I guess you might say. Surely there's a lot more, ups and downs and nuances to what that time was like. We don't have proper records of what it was actually like, but the evidence that you've come across and others sort of indicates, that spirituality, like genuine, empirical, if you will, spirituality was central to that time and place, and that there was a lot of balance.
That word balance that you use is so important, because that's exactly what we see in Chavin. The major temple site for this culture was located at the confluence of two rivers, and you go up the stairs into this temple, and one half is black and the other half is white. And there's this massive pillared door, and you've got black on one side and white on the other side, and you go in, and it's like these serpentine tunnels that sort of labyrinth under the earth. These very small, intimate spaces where it's believed they would have been drinking San Pedro. With the sounds of the rivers, with the with ancestral instruments made of conch shells. It's this concept of balance. We see this balance in between duality continuing even to the present day, and the altars that curanderos, shamanic practitioners here, use in relationship with the plant. They sort of set up this duality between the wild and the domesticated, between the masculine and the feminine, but between the old and the new, between sickness and health, and the plant sits on the altar at the center of these two fields. So many people have said, and it appears to be the case, that San Pedro is very involved in balance, in the not so much the transcendence of duality. I'm very suspicious of this idea of transcendence, actually. Not so much the transcendence of duality as the complementary relationship of duality, of the two, of the interaction between the two, creating life itself.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I think, when I hear people use the term non-duality, they're not necessarily talking about transcendence, depending on how you exactly define the word transcendence. There may be talking about the recognition that we are all one, that that we are not separate, that the ego is, a Buddhist would say, an illusion, but that's another story. Chris Beige, who's written the wonderful book LSD and the Mind of the Universe, has told me he's suspicious of what he calls the up and out spiritual technologies.
Me too, and it's we are I think the mind only works in duality, and that that any form of love is non-duality. Non-duality is not something that you can take 6 grams of mushroom and then blast out of reality. It's any time that there's love, there's non-duality. And I think that's very much the case with San Pedro. It's not a sort of a shooting out of the body, shooting out of material reality as sinking into material reality, into material matter, mother, into sinking into the heart, and the sensations of the body, and all that this incredible human existence can do, and all this, this body and this organism, are so full of potential for beauty and change. And in my experience, San Pedro just doesn't have anything to do with this idea of of enlightenment, of escaping from the body. It's very much about sinking into the body, learning from the body. The body is a compass. Our bodies as compasses. And the fact that every being that has ever lived is right here in the soil underneath our feet.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when people talk about ego death with psychedelics, that model does not resonate with my experience of San Pedro. We're not trying to shatter the ego. We're trying to build a better one. We're trying to, become better beings. We're not sort of disappearing into this idea of mysticism or enlightenment. We're getting up the day after ceremony and doing the dishes because the kitchen is dirty.
Right. Well, I think the wisest of the wise have always understood that that's actually what enlightenment is. It's being fully here and present, right, and not out of the body or gone somewhere else or something like that. In fact, you might have heard it. There's an old Zen saying that before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water, and after enlightenment, chop wood and carry water, right? So it depends on how you use those terms, but I think the real meaning or value of understanding anything related to this notion of enlightenment is just and this comes back into ego too. When you say it's not about kind of getting rid of the ego, I think it's, as I understand it, I certainly wouldn't say I'm enlightened to say this, but the problematic aspect of the ego is the ways in which we stop energy, in a sense, and block ourselves and live within a narrative that protects us, from the full exposure to the rough and tumble of life, so to speak. And ego dissolution, in my understanding, is relaxing out of that to become more present, not more otherworldly or something. Anyway, that's a whole other sort of philosophical discussion.
No, I agree completely. And it's very much related to sort of this idea that a lot of people have, this, what happens with psychedelics happens in the brain. I think a lot of people are learning with ayahuasca that's not the case. And, with San Pedro and peyote and these, incredible visionary plants of the Americas that and elsewhere, it's simply not the case. I mean, if we talk about the fact that they're working on the serotonin system, an enormous portion of our serotonin is actually produced in the gut. If you're talking about the central the nervous system, we have a bundle of nerves the size of a cat's brain in our heart, the size of a dog's brain in our stomachs, in our guts, and these plants, and particularly San Pedro, is a very whole body experience, a very sensorial experience that doesn't have much to do with thinking. That's you really feel the plant moving through your body, through your blood, through your bones, and working in a way that does not have a lot to do with Western concepts of health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Your description of the effects of San Pedro sound similar to my experience with the peyote cactus, which also has mescaline in it, and that experience is within the Native American church, where I used to go for about a dozen years to probably 3 dozen or so of their all-night peyote prayer ceremonies. And there's occasionally people would talk about visions, beyond the human, so to speak. But for the most part, it was a communal experience around a fire with a shared prayer and eyes open most of the time. And it was about kind of what you're saying, like connecting with the heart as much as anything, connecting with your own wisdom, and that, quote unquote, hallucinations are potentially even a distraction. And I've even heard that from some of the more, I would say, wise ayahuasqueros, that sort of those brilliant visions and geometric patterns and all those kinds of things that people see, or some people say, are just really the ante-room into the real space where you're connecting with the spirit of the plant and the teachings of the plant itself. So you've kind of answered a question that we were going to head toward anyway, but maybe there's a bit more to say about it, which is this notion of Huachuma or San Pedro being incredibly unique. And so is there more you can say about how it differs from, say, ayahuasca, for example? Because, taking ayahuasca as a particular example, as a plant that's almost ubiquitous on the planet now. Can you have you already said what you want to say about how it's unique, or do you want to add some more to that?
Oh, more or less, yeah. I mean, and you nailed it. Talking about the peyote ceremonies that you've taken part in, that, it's not about closing your eyes and getting really quiet and putting on the blinders and putting on the music and, as a lot of people are doing with mushrooms now. It's a very social medicine. It's a very, it works with groups of people in incredible ways it organizes people in ceremony, and it just brings this incredible sense of love and human connection, and connection with the more than human as well. I would almost say that San Pedro, more than anything, is about relationship, relationship with other humans, relationship with the more than human, with nature, with water, with fire, with earth, with air. It's not, it exists entirely, in this space, in this relational field, in this space of relationship. And that's something that we see, connecting incredibly beautifully to Andean concepts of health. In the Andes, people, communities, are organized. They're, communities, ayus. They see, individuals sort of differentiating themselves, arising from this shared field of community, rather than, individuals coming together to form a community. It's the community that's the unit, and the people who arise out of that, and the lamas who arise out of that, and the grass that arises out of that. And so it's this very collective force, that individuals differentiate themselves out of. And even the concept of the body, in many places in the Andes, is patterned on a mountain. The summits of mountains are often called umapacha, or head place, whereas the valleys are seen as the feet and the legs. And the sort of the agricultural mid zones where they grow potatoes, and a lot of the food are the stomach, or the torso. And so, we see sort of this, the rivers are literally seen as the blood of Pachamama. The earth as her body. Nobody digs, a trowel into their field without first blessing it, without, planting flowers with the potatoes, without making offerings to the land, because the land is a body. And so how could San Pedro work only in the head when the human body is the same as a mountain, and the feet are the same, as a river?
So that makes me wonder what is the current, well, okay, so it's a two-part question. It seems to be very easy to grow, so my guess would be that sustainability isn't a huge problem, but you probably know something more about that than I do. But also, I'm curious, what kind of use is it being put to in Peru, and how widespread is it now down that way as a spiritual healing medicine?
Yeah, so a lot of for the most part, tourists who come to Peru to drink San Pedro go to Cusco, go to the Sacred Valley. And medicinal San Pedro does not grow there. It's not the climate. It doesn't grow well there. there are related plants. There's higanton, which, is very, very, very low in mescaline. You're going to drink it and throw up, and that's the end of it. Where we really see medicinal relationship is in North Peru now, and that's continuous since the conquest. But I'm sorry, what was you were?
Well, I'm asking you essentially two questions. One, like the sort of physical sustainability, so to speak, of it, and also, how widespread is its use among Peruvians these days?
Yeah, so the Northern Peruvian healing cult that has to do with San Pedro is incredibly well known in Peru and afar. There are people who come from all over South America to work with maestros with San Pedro in North Peru, in Cajamarca, in Chiclayo, in Trujillo. And so, what we see is that, they're the ones who really know. These maestros in the north, they're the ones who really know what's happening with the plant. They're the ones who really know how to work with the plant's energy. These mestizo healers in the north, and yet, the tourists are going to Cusco, where a lot of white people are working with the plant, where, the indigenous Queros people are, doing the wonderful thing of beginning to use the plant again just in the last 2 generations. So that's really wonderful, but the real lineage of use is in North Peru. So when we talk about cultural sustainability, a lot of those, if people really want to meet the plant, and if we want to see some of that recognition and tourism going towards the northern maestros, the ones who really know. So that's the cultural sustainability front. The physical sustainability of the plant, the biological sustainability, in the last 10 years is going downhill a lot. And this doesn't make a lot of sense because, as I've told you before, Stephen, these plants grow, they grow 1.5 meters a year. Every single head, grows, or sorry, not 1.5 meters, 0.5 meter, 1.5 foot a year. So they grow incredibly fast and faster than almost any entheogen that we know about, except perhaps mushrooms. So they don't have this very slow growing problem the way that peyote and ayahuasca do. But and so you'd think that we'd be fine. They're very easy to cultivate. You'd think that everybody would take their San Pedro from their own garden, and be planting in their own garden. But actually what we see is that there are companies, there are individuals, there are, many illegal export companies that are, going into communities and paying just nothing, paying very, very little, dirt cheap prices to get the community to cut their plants. Because what are the plants, what are the communities going to do with the plants? They've lost a lot of their relationship with San Pedro in the last 500 years. So, it's becoming a big problem, and Peru governmentally is just now starting to regulate the movement of San Pedro, regulate the harvesting of San Pedro, which is wonderful, except, it's not really being enforced. And, there's sort of the wider problem of cultural sustainability, and the fact that the people in the communities are not recognizing the value of this plant as anything more than, here's, a massive, plant that's probably 40 years old that I'm going to hack to pieces and sell to you for, $1 a kilo, or sorry, $1 a head. $1 a dried kilo, which is just devastating. So that's, that's where a lot of my energy has been going over the last few months, is, really inquiring into what do we need to do on a sustainability front to make sure that these wild populations of San Pedro survive. Because, we can plant San Pedro in our gardens all day. It's incredible medicine. It's, I would argue it's more, having relationship with the plant in your garden, giving it love every day, giving it water, understanding how the plant cycles and grows, is as great a medicine as drinking the plant. And that if you're drinking the plant and you're not growing the plant, you don't understand the plant.
Hmm.
But these wild stalks of San Pedro hold the memory of millennia of San Pedro, relationship with that land. These incredible wild fountains of energy, of relationship, that exists in these wild stalks of San Pedro cannot be allowed to be decimated.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Very important, obviously. Yeah, wonderful. Excuse me. Well, there's so much more I want to ask you about. And this is a slight left turn from where we were, but you made reference a little while ago to there's a big difference between the Andean understanding, cosmological understanding, so to speak, of what health is to the so-called quote unquote Western world, or the modern urbanized technologized world's understanding of health. Could you elaborate on that a little more, please?
Sure, yeah. Health in the Andean understanding is not individual human health. It's not like this imaginary skin that, this epidermal imaginary that we have, that we're somehow these like little capsules packaged in plastic, the way to meat and fruit in the grocery store. There's this, the Indian concepts of health recognize that the human is in constant flux with everything around us. So, the human, a human cannot be healthy if the mountain is poisoned. And likewise, the mountain cannot be healthy if the human is traumatized. And so, it's seen as this, this flow of energy. I'll give you an example, which is quite interesting, which is the one of susto, or, we would call it fright or trauma in English. They actually see, many healers see this as, emotional fluid gets scared out of the body, like life force actually gets expelled from the body when somebody's frightened or traumatized. And so in order to retrieve the lost life force, many times it's an offering to the river to bring back, to cleanse the difficult energy away and to bring back the lost life force. It's seen as this, you lost some fluid in your body through this experience of trauma, and now you have to go to the greater pool of energy that is nature, that is the river, the mountain, the Pachamama, the origin, in order to get this. It doesn't happen. We're not a closed capsule. You don't just change your beliefs and get better. It's it's this very body-based interaction with the elements, with water, with fire. Air is seen as a fluid. There's this, there are mal aires or buen aires, good winds and bad winds that affect people. They're not, we're affected by everything around us because we are everything around us.
Beautifully put. And, as you say that, I flash on something that's occurred to me so often, which just seems out of whack, which is, for people of sort of what you might call middle class, lifestyles in Canada and the United States in particular, we're being marketed a lot with, healthy food, organic food, supplements of all these different kinds, but they're all targeted at the individual in that sense as an isolated, so on. And the thing that, I find so ironic is, you go to the pharmacy and you get some, health supplement, and it's packaged in plastic that, gets chucked, more often than not. And I always think, yeah, okay, so they're focusing on the individual, but they're not paying any attention to the larger picture of what, we're doing environmentally. Yeah, so thank you for putting that perspective on that's wonderful. And as you said that about when you mentioned the river, like a relationship, it reminded me that you've also pointed out to me previously that another term for Huachuma is Aguacoya, or water queen, and that it has a relationship with water and the water cycle. And I gather that's related to what you were just saying, but can you elaborate a little further on that?
It very much is. So in many Andean understandings and cosmologies, the lifeblood of Earth, well, sort of the origin of everything was this cosmic sea that circles the Earth. So it's the literal ocean, and it's also this cosmic ocean that if you were to walk far enough in any direction, you'd get back to this ocean. The inland version of that is Lake Titicaca in the south of Peru, this massive, one of the biggest lakes in the world, and that's seen as the origin point from where humans arose. So, as sort of the heart, if you will, of this cosmic sea. The Milky Way is seen as part of the sea as well. The stars are part of the sea. There are all of these ideas about underground rivers which link all of the water in the world. So all of the water, in any source, whether it's a spring, whether it's a creek, whether it's the ocean itself, whether it's Lake Titicaca or one of these highland lakes, is connected with the origin of all things, with this great mother sea that encircles us all. And so that's the same is true about the water in the body. And so, of course, that's where the notions of health come in. But it's seen, all of this underground water, this water that moves between, that moves down in rivers, that wells up in lakes and springs, is not something dead. It's something alive. It's something that contains all of the life force of the ancestors. So it's when somebody dies, when anything dies, the life force goes into the water, into the underground network of water. And so, this word that's used more in Ecuador than in Peru, but appears to be old is aguacoya, which, agua is the Spanish term for water, coya is the Quechua term for queen. And if we look at the archaeological evidence, it appears that San Pedro was used almost as this master controller of water, this master, a plant that would bring fertility and wetness and moistness to earth that was dry, which is, the entire coast of Peru, that would quell the water in places where floods were happening, which happens a lot. I told you it happened yesterday. There was a big flood up in Marcahuasi, above me here. And so San Pedro was sort of this intermediary, and is in many ways an intermediary, a way for people to talk to water and say, please don't wipe our village out in a landslide. And please, our crops are dying, our children are thirsty, we need there to be more water coming down to this desiccated desert. And so, San Pedro is the water queen, to me is not only poetic, it's very deeply real. We see, these almost 3,000-year-old, figurines of women, like hooded women, holding the San Pedro, like welling up from their palms. There's one of a woman nursing a baby at one breast and nursing a length of San Pedro cactus at the other. So it's just this incredibly tender relationship with this beautiful plant, this being who helps people get, what they need, helps people, as a mother would, as a queen would, cares for the people, and it helps them extract the water that they need from the underground. And when I say water from the underground, I also mean ancestors. I also mean all of the power of the root systems of the ancient ones, of lineage, of ancestry, of the dead beneath our feet. And so, yeah, I mean, I could go on.
Well, that was lovely. I'm really glad you shared all that. So, excuse me, I got a cough a little here. Perhaps we're getting close to a time when it's good to wind this up. And so I would like to ask you a couple of questions about where she and the cultural use of it are going. You had used the term with me that, quote, her time is coming. So what does that mean? How is her time coming?
I think so far in Western culture, in Euro-American culture, that is to say, mostly in the global North, when we talk about psychedelics, um, we talk about sort of gaining spiritual knowledge. Um, and the, the beings that have served very well for us in the pursuit of sort of gaining spiritual knowledge, of feeling like we're one with everything, of feeling like we're one with God, um, are mushrooms and ayahuasca. Um, and that, you know, certainly not that that mushrooms and ayahuasca are not incredible embodied beings, that, you know, that have brought us in every way to where we need to be right now. But that, like I say, San Pedro, you know, is the one who does the dishes, is the one who, um, you know, sort of gathers the world under its wings and says, here's shelter. You know, here's the very beautiful way of taking care of yourself, of tending relationship with yourself, with relationship with other people, with relationship with plants and animals and water. Um, and you know, I feel that that San Pedro is very applied, very embodied, and very connected to the day to day, to, you know, to what each of us does on a daily basis to do our best to love the beings around us, to love the world. And that it's, you know, there's nothing about San Pedro that's abstract. Just, you know, it's no longer, San Pedro brings a spirituality that's no longer an abstraction. It's no longer sort of this, it's not about ideals, it's not about concepts, it's about action. So, you know, I think we've, as a global culture, if you will, we're coming to a place where we understand, oh yeah, we're all one. We understand, you know, that we're not just bodies. We're not just bodies the way that we thought we were. And now, you know, I sort of feel like a lot of us are turning back and saying, wait, but we are bodies. We are bodies. We are, and we're one. And that means we love each other, but we are also, you know, separate, self-determined beings. And you know, and that brings a lot of responsibility. It's the hard part, you know. It's not the easy part of, oh, I've gained this spiritual knowledge. It's the hard part of integrating it, of bringing it back, of shaping our egos, which we need, into something beautiful that tends to and helps the creatures around us.
Beautifully put again. um, so that could be a lovely way to finish up here, but I'm also wondering if you know, so somebody's watching this or listening to it that would like to more involved with San Pedro one way or another, either by experiencing it, learning from it, following its pathways, and or advocating for it in some ways or another. What would you say to people who or how they might, you know, enter further into a relationship with Huachuma or San Pedro? What would be your guidance or advice for such people?
That everything that San Pedro teaches is contained in the way that San Pedro grows. So get a plant and plant it in the ground if you can, and in a pot if you can't. and watch it and be with it every day and make relationship. That's that's the most important thing. In North America, San Pedro is sold as an ornamental. You can get it at Home Depot. And those, that's probably going to be, a very widespread sort of low medicine cultivar. And there are certainly, you can buy whole plants from many people online that come from specific places in Peru. But, the most important thing is just to be in relationship with the living plant. And then, microdosing San Pedro is incredibly profound. It's very, this is an aspect of my research that I'm just starting to explore with people in Peru who are microdosing. And it's a very, it begins a process that if you have access to San Pedro in a legal way, it begins a process that can prepare you in an incredible way to take a full dose and to really work with the plant, really meet the plant's spirit at some point. Once the plant's inside you, it's inside you forever. And so, any way that you can be in contact with the plant's energy, especially growing, it's legal. It's beautiful. You can see the flowers on this incredible plant right above. And it's just an absolute joy to, in Peru, the vast majority of people who have San Pedro in their gardens never drink the plant. They say that San Pedro whistles when a robber comes, when somebody's with bad intentions comes, they say that San Pedro whistles to alert you. So mostly people, in Peru plant it for protection and for, to care for the home.
Yeah, very interesting. So it sounds like what I'm interpreting from what you're saying, to the, sort of quote Western world, so to speak, is that the ways that you can use it are fairly flexible as long as you have the right attitude. Like perhaps I'm guessing you could get together with a few friends. You don't necessarily need to have, as long as you take a, reverent attitude toward it and know what you're doing and know what your dosage is, you don't necessarily need to have a guide or shaman with you particularly. What would you say about that?
In low doses, San Pedro is not going to kick your ass. It's not, it's not going to terrify you. It's actually related to the compounds, the compound MDMA. So, it's very euphoric. It's very beautiful in small doses. With a small group, it's lovely. But, when people say that San Pedro is like softer than ayahuasca, it's not true. It's not. And being in ceremony with somebody who has relationship with this plant over years, who knows how to direct the plant's energy and work with the plants, and it's take for real doses of this plant, follow the same advice you would use with ayahuasca, which is do not this plant is not soft.
Okay, good. With both ayahuasca, at least in the Amazonian mestizo traditions, and with peyote in the Native American church, there's a long accumulated body of, well, it varies from region to region and even person to person sometimes, especially with the ayahuasqueros, but there are songs, chant-like songs, icaros in the case of ayahuasca and so on. Is there any extant body of material, song material that people know and use within those communities, say in northern Peru, for example?
Yeah, there's not to the extent that there are icaros. There are some songs called tarjos, which are often very religious, and the plant's often used in Catholicized ceremonies. So a lot of these tarjos are sometimes used. The other thing that curanderos use quite a bit is sort of performative language. So instead of saying, I'm doing something, they say I go doing something. You know, instead of estoy sanando, I am healing, they say voy sanando, I go healing. And it's like the words themselves become the spell, become the direction to the plant, to direct the plant's energy. You know, San Pedro is incredibly connected with music, and it's, you know, there's not, because the plant does not have a surviving pure indigenous tradition. You know, its greatest cultural tradition is with mestizo people, urban people, you know, that survives today anyway. There's not a body of songs the way that there are Icaros, but it's a good inquiry to explore on your own.
Yeah. Well, I could have stopped, you know, with that uplifting message of a few minutes ago. We got back more into the detail a little there, but that's fine. I think this feels like a good place to stop. I've more or less exhausted the kind of questions that I really wanted to ask you today. And so before I say goodbye and thank you, I just want to ask you, are there any links of anything that you would like people to pay attention to? I can, as I mentioned at the beginning, I can put on little titles under the screen here for those who are watching this, and if they're listening to it, they'll just have to try to listen carefully.
Sure, yeah. Instagram is the best place to follow me, at laurel.sugden or at huachuma.collective.
So Laurel.Sugden, and it's spelled Sugden. Yeah.
Or huachuma.collective.
Huachuma, again spelled Huachuma dot collective. Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool.
Yep, and we're just starting a newsletter for Huachuma Collective as well, which you're welcome to send me an email to get subscribed to. Where you know, a lot of amazing photos of wild San Pedro and updates on the research.
So the email address that I actually have on paper here for you is laurel.sugden at alumni, alumni.ubc.ca. Best one?
Perfect.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for that, Laurel. I hope that you're right. I imagine you are, that, quote, her time is coming. And you know, as we both know, this is a time of great urgency for changes in consciousness and changes in, you know, worldview, I guess, that put us back into balance. So thank you for doing your part. It's wonderful work that you're doing, in my opinion, and the way you do it, if I may be maudlin for a second, your heart comes through as far as I can feel it. And so I really appreciate that your, you know, sort of intelligence and your heart combined to share these very important messages and information. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks for being the vehicle and translator, so to speak, to share so many messages with people.
Yeah, you're welcome. And also want to thank your soundtrack, your dogs.
Sorry about the dogs.
They got excited. They definitely got excited, along with a few other things like a horn honking and someone knocking at your door. So we kind of had a soundtrack there, but you kept your focus through all that extremely well. So again, thank you for sharing all that.
Thanks, Stephen.